This is Cinematire Short Raves, where I talk about a specific costume thing that I love and can't stop thinking about in a movie or TV series. Based on the insanely popular video game series, The Last of Us is about Joel and Ellie, a pair connected through the harshness of the world they live in, who are forced to endure brutal circumstances and ruthless killers on a trek across post-outbreak America. This is a show I really wanted to wait to watch until it was concluded.
Because you suck at shooting, or like in general?
But the friend I always think about when the topic of this game comes up, her name is Jane, practically insisted, and I trust her. Between her and our beloved producer Drake, loving the source material as much as they do and knowing I would like it, I jumped in at episode 3 when Drake talked about how it brought him to tears.
I was never afraid before you showed up.
These bullies are always making me watch stuff I like, I'm telling you. First and foremost, the infected are beautifully decayed in that way that I find incredibly appealing and terrifying, like Vanitas paintings, MPD Psycho, Hannibal, and anything Guillermo del Toro. Their bodies and clothing look lived in, aged, and have been decaying in a very realistic way. They look like branches growing mushrooms. The colors and textures are amazing. The spots of wear look worn and not cut away like a costume, like I'm wearing a costume of a mushroom person. The squishiness of the prosthetics is really gross and totally perfect. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know one of my favorite sci-fi genres is post-apocalypse. There are all kinds of visual shorthands you can have in this type of future depending on what the disaster is. The main thing that's noticeable is obviously a smaller population, so using that as a jumping off point, it's important to dress the society accordingly with what the remaining people have access to. Hiccups in imports, supply chains, base materials creation, as well as destruction of farms, factories, stores, etc. result in finite access to resources. But also we live in a world that has an abundance of clothing. There's literally laws in several African countries that say that the US can't import clothes because we've sent way too many. So there are clothes, it's just a matter of being able to access them and how quality they are. So the first thing I tend to look at in what people are wearing is how it's worn, like what spots are worn away, what's dirty, and does it look realistic and thoughtful or just painted with coffee grounds and motor oil. In The Last of Us, there's been a population diminishing health crisis. Depending on where the clumps of people are, there's access to untouched or lightly used clothing, but for the most part, we're probably in a future where after 20 years, unless they're making treks to dead towns for clothing, which it looks like some of the different pockets aren't allowing, they're going to need to mend or make garments. In episode 3, we have one man living in an entire small town for years before meeting someone who eventually becomes his partner, but even between two people, that is a vast amount of clothing and resources. They have a fairly low-impact life and access the belongings of the people who fled in their area. It makes sense that what they would have would be in good shape. Access to power and easily acquired water is also likely to help with the longevity of their belongings. Everything worn by just normal types are gently worn. They're clearly mended and worn in with stains at points of skin contact like wrists, neck, etc., but have been laundered like in episode 8 in the religious community. At one point, Ellie is given a quote, new coat, and it's in really good shape, so it's only been stained like a little bit, but it's clean. The Raiders and Fireflies are more dirty, their clothes are in rougher shape because they're living hand to mouth and deal with a lot more combat.
Cool. There are Firefly people?
This show reminds me aesthetically of another favorite of mine, the unfairly slept on Sweet Tooth.
I don't know what that is, but I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Sweet Tooth also deals with a population decimating biological event that results in way fewer people. There are sections of the country that have infrastructure and power and more access. While these pockets have nicer things, they're still obviously worn. These folks aren't really allowed to leave so they can live in their suburban fantasy while things are brought to them, and they take care of them to the best of their abilities. Then there are folks like Pubba and Gus who are completely cut off from society, so they have finite resources. You see as Gus is growing, Pubba splices sweaters together as he gets bigger, and then Gus wears Pubba's clothes rolled up. That visual shorthand is perfect and thoughtful for showing time passing and bodies growing. One of my favorite scenes is when Gus and Big Man end up at a resort housing a small family of 2 adults and a kid. Their clothing is really nice, very fresh, super clean. It makes so much sense that 3 people living in a mountain resort with a gift shop full of clothing over the course of 8 to 10 years would have access to nice things. You wear it until it wears out and then you put on a new one. There's only 3 people, one of them is growing, so if he's too big for the small thing, then that small thing is cast off and he has a new big thing. There's also a mall scene with its own power source, so when he meets more kids, he has a taste of the before time, something he'd never experienced before. We see this too in The Last of Us. It shows what we've seen in our world during disasters like hurricanes and wars. There are people who take necessities and there are opportunists. So the mall appears to be empty of indulgences and basic clothing. Fashion, like lingerie, is left there to rob. But without access to direct sunlight to make it fade and age, it's still just there, like a sexy time capsule of life before.
I mean, I don't get why people back then wanted all this stuff. Do you need me to explain it to you?
What I love about both of these shows, The Last of Us and Sweet Tooth, is it shows normal people, not just fighty, punchy types. We see people surviving, not just by shooting each other, but gathering and traveling and learning. There's so many allusions to school in The Last of Us, including a scene where all the kids are in matching gym sweats. We see proof of people making things last, like mended clothing and small gardens. I so love the scene about Frank wanting to fix up the exterior of the house for a little sense of normalcy.
You say resource management? So help me, I will run through one of your tripwires.
I definitely want to delve more into how TV and movies dress diminished populations. Shows like The 100 and Jeremiah show what people would do years into the future without practical knowledge of what people did before. Films like Mad Max and Tank Girl show worlds with controlled and reduced resources resulting in groups identified by clothing. The Last of Us was so beautiful. I can see why my friends have been so enamored with the game for so long, and seeing how much the show trusted the source material is an absolute treat. Now to ask you, what do you think are the most important garments to have in a scarce landscape? After time has passed, where would you look for new clothes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you to my patrons for being amazing. I appreciate you, and I couldn't do it without all of you. Until next time, be fancy, be adventurous. Look, I know I didn't really talk a lot about the amazing prosthetics, but that was because they were perfect and I love them and they scared me and I don't want nightmares tonight, so thank you!